The Borderlands franchise has a long and dense timeline which spans hundreds of years of galactic history across 4 mainline games, a couple of narrative adventures, and the odd chaotic spin-off. I'm looking at you, Tiny Tina. And that's not even including the movie, which technically isn't canon, and might even spin off into its own cinematic timeline, who knows.
God, I hate this planet.
The Looter Shooter series has a surprisingly deep vein of lore that stretches over 1,000 years into the past. But how exactly does it all tie together? Well, it's not exactly straightforward. In fact, it's a little backwards, as the timeline basically works itself in reverse from the present day of new tales from the Borderlands, back to the vault-hunting antics of the main trilogy, and the con artist capers of Telltale's spin-off Tales from the Borderlands. And that's not even mentioning the pre-sequel, which sandwiches itself in between the events of the first 2 Borderlands games. Regardless, with a tie-in movie starring Cate Blanchett, Kevin Hart and Jack Black in cinemas, and rumours are swirling about a potential Borderlands 4, there's no better time to dig back into the lore of Gearbox's mad series. Hey, my name's Adam, and join me as I break down and explain the complete timeline of the Borderlands franchise. Okay, so the whole Borderlands timeline kicks off with the mysterious Eridians, who disappeared from the universe thousands of years before the events of the first game in the series. In short, the Eridians were a mysterious ancient alien species who came into contact with an evil entity appropriately named the Destroyer. To put a stop to this all-consuming universal threat, the Eridians start construction of a giant planet-sized prison, aka the Great Vault, aka Pandora, the central planet that a good deal of the Borderlands franchise takes place on. On top of this main vault, they also create a false vault on Pandora, designed to trick future treasure hunters, as well as a host of biomechanical protectors known as the Guardians, and just to be extra safe, a giant guardian that goes by the name of the Warrior. Lastly, the Eridians build a whole complex of vaults across the galaxy, largely as test chambers to prepare future generations for battle against the Destroyer. Gotta appreciate their optimistic forward thinking there. Okay, to lure the Destroyer into his cozy new jail cell, the Eridians basically offer up their entire population as bait, a plan that naturally isn't wholeheartedly embraced. To help support this mass sacrifice, they enlist the help of a siren, who in short are mysterious and powerful beings who can manipulate the elemental forces of the universe. The siren in question goes by the name of Nereid, and she creates a device on the Eridian homeworld of Necrotafeo to leech the life out of the Eridian people and into a machine that then seals the Destroyer in the Great Vault. And just like that, an entire species is wiped from existence. Nereid then hightails it back to a vault on Necrotafeo to hide away the technology that basically committed genocide on a galactic level. Damn, this franchise has a brutal backstory. Anyway, let's meet some humans. While there's nothing to compare to the suffering of the Eridians, humans don't exactly fare much better in this hellscape of the galaxy. Their history within the frontiers of the 6 galaxies kickstarts around 320 years ago, when the human race finally masters the science behind superliminal spaceflight. This breakthrough allows them to reach for the stars, and humanity starts colonizing across the galaxy. And in order to regulate this, a centralized government is formed to keep tabs on the vastly expanded reach of the human race. And this colonial era lasts a good 200 odd years until it all comes crashing down at the hands of business. Yep, the government is eventually overthrown by a conglomerate of greedy megacorps, which kickstarts a lengthy and bloody war between the 2 factions. And when I say lengthy, I mean the best part of 40 years. Yep, that brings us up to about 68 years ago, and the galaxy is now largely run by the business executives. And it's at this point that the surviving megacorps broker a deal for peaceful trade, a deal that they call the 30-year Accord. The deal lasts 4 months. Yep, in the hungry world of big business, the megacorps start fighting among themselves again for the lion's share of, well, anything. And across the next decade or so, the corporate wars sees the number of megacorps dwindle until it's just a handful of absolutely rotten enterprises. Chief among these are a number of megacorps that will come to be quite important across this timeline, such as the Atlas Corporation, Dahl, and Hyperion, all of which just happen to make weapons. Anyway, with the corporations largely controlling the galaxy, we enter into a new age of discovery, led by the very first Vault Hunter, Typhon de Leon. We're about 37 years back into the past at this point, and an orphan Typhon is seeking to escape the ass crack of a planet that he lives on, which just so happens to be the prison vault world of Pandora. Typhon eventually makes it off-world and starts a new career as a treasure hunter, a career that eventually sees him make a big discovery. Yep, Typhon is the first lad to discover one of the Eridians' vaults on the planet of Promethea. Instead of rooting around inside though, he basically sells his discovery to Atlas, who opens the vault to find a veritable treasure trove of technology. In short, the wealth of Eridian technology allows the Atlas Corporation to become the dominant megacorp in the galaxy, and they quickly snap up Typhon as the first official Vault Hunter, largely in the hopes that he'll bring them more Eridian technology. Typhon doesn't stay in this position for too long though, as he falls for Queen Dido of Athenas, who isn't long for this world, leaving a grieving Typhon unemployed and alone. Atlas barrels on with their pursuit of Eridian tech regardless, and this eventually leads them to the discovery of more vaults back on Pandora. Word gets out about Atlas's discovery and a flock of self-styled vault hunters descend on the dusty planet to search for treasure. And across the next 2 decades, Pandora effectively becomes a hub for various vault hunting activities, with one of Atlas's rivals, Dahl, muscling in on the Eridian-built world as well. Dahl takes a different tack to Atlas though, by shipping in a workforce largely made up of convicts under the guise of mining for a substance known as iridium. But obviously they're also running a side hustle to hunt some vaults too. Neither megacorp is particularly successful in finding anything, and both start to slowly withdraw their interest from the region, which leaves the planet as a bit of a backwater shithole with a population made up of mostly criminals and killers. Meanwhile, Dahl also establishes a base of operations on the Pandoran moon of Elpis, when they discover ancient mines that might potentially be Eridian. Spoilers, they are. This enterprise does not end well for Dahl, or Elpis for that matter, as their operations trigger an apocalyptic event on the moon that destroys much of the surface and incinerates the atmosphere surrounding the lunar planet. This cataclysm later goes by the name of the Krakening, and leads to the Dahl Corporation hastily retreating from Elpis. Okay, before we get to the events of the very first game in the series, it's time to catch up one last time with poor old Typhon. After his poor fortune on Athenas, Typhon eventually returns to Pandora and gets caught up in the vault hunting craze. He meets an Atlas scientist by the name of Leda Calypso, and the pair fall in love. Becoming disenfranchised by the greed of the Atlas Corporation, the pair strike out to discover the Eridian homeworld of Necrotafeo, which they eventually crash land on. With their ship damaged beyond repair, the stranded pair start a new life on the planet, and they have twins, Troy and Tyrene. Leda unfortunately dies during childbirth, lumping even more misfortune on poor Typhon, who now has to raise 2 precocious tots who grow increasingly annoyed at their father. More on this pair much later. And that brings our happy-go-lucky Borderlands history lesson to a close. Okay, we're finally at the very first Borderlands game, which takes place roughly 13 years before the events of New Tales from the Borderlands, which remember is our North Star for piecing this crazy timeline together. The game kickstarts with a cast of 4 Vault Hunters. The Hunter, Mordecai, the Siren, Lilith, played by Cate Blanchett in the non-canon movie, the Soldier, Roland, Kevin Hart's character in the movie, and Brick, who just likes to smash things. As a side note, their respective origin stories before they step onto Marcus Kincaid's bus to the township of Firestone are laid out in the Borderlands Origins tie-in comics. Anyway, the game kicks off when you pick one of this motley crew and dismount the bus to enter Firestone. Only, just as they disembark, the Hunter's journey is rudely interrupted by a hologram that only they can see. This blue apparition goes by the name of the Guardian Angel, and she states that she'll be half of the Hunter's guide through the Borderlands. The other half is this chaotic little robot called Claptrap, who's pretty much the franchise's mascot, who hands the Hunter an Echo communication display and chaperones them into the dusty backwater town. And from here, the quartet of hunters get to cleaning the place up, doing odd jobs for an assortment of oddballs including Dr. Zed and TK Baha. All the while, the Guardian Angel chimes in to help guide the team through their glorified chores, which all leads up to the quartet finally finding a vault key, or a fragment of one at least. Yep, despite Atlas and Dahl searching fruitlessly for decades, this ragtag bunch stumbles onto Eridian gold and Pandora in no time at all. Naturally, news of the Vault Hunters' find spreads like wildfire throughout the Borderlands, and this leads to a Dahl Corp scientist called Dr. Patricia Tannis contacting the crew to aid them with their new find. In a massive info dump, she tells the Hunters that she's finally found evidence of an Eridian vault on Pandora, but that it can only be opened once every 200 years, and the next opening is coincidentally happening very soon, because of course it is. And so she instructs the crew to find the remaining fragments of the vault key, which sends them off to do more shooting and more looting. Hot on their heels is the Atlas Corporation, who naturally aren't best pleased that someone has finally found a way into the vault while their backs have been turned. They send out Commandant Steele to get control of the situation, and she rapidly makes her mark by kidnapping Dr. Tannis and nabbing the complete vault key. All of this eventually leads to a final showdown at the inevitable grand opening of the vault. In attendance are the Vault Hunters, Commandant Steele and her Atlas goons, and making a special appearance, the Destroyer, who emerges from the vault and promptly skewers Steele. After a climactic fight, the Vault Hunters successfully defeat the Ancient Bastard, who is sucked back into its prison. And the game comes to an end with a little more context on the Guardian Angel, who turns out to be a broadcast signal from the orbiting Hyperion satellite. She congratulates the Hunters before revealing that the vault will now be sealed for another 200 years. And in a final sting, we see the same satellite send down a signal to our mate Claptrap, which transforms him from the happy-go-lucky robot we know and love to an interplanetary ninja assassin. We'll catch up on this mad lad very shortly. But before we move on to the next stop on our timeline, the Borderlands franchise has always had a strong tale of DLC expansion content, much of it expanding the various narratives at play, and this kicked off right from the start with the original game. Yep, the main campaign was followed up by 4 story expansions of varying absurdity, the first of which is the zombie island of Dr. Ned. Launching when every game contractually had to have a zombie mode, thanks Call of Duty, the zombie island of Dr. Ned sees the titular Doctor, who's totally unrelated to the main game's Dr. Zed.
I was never as good as my totally not made up brother Zed, and we're totally different people.
Accidentally turn a whole township into zombies. In short, you spend the entire expansion investigating the good Doctor, who obviously turns out to be a complete wrong'un. Next up is Mad Moxie's Underdome Riot, which is basically a glorified arena battle mode. It does introduce us to the ringleader of proceedings though, Mad Moxie, who is using the battle arenas to find herself a 4th husband, as you do. The third expansion, The Secret Armory of General Knox, expands the narrative much more substantially though, and introduces us to a key character in Borderlands lore, Athena. Athena is a former Atlas assassin who's got something of a vendetta against the Megacorp after she was tricked into killing her own sister. On top of Athena, we also meet General Knox, a bitter mess of a man who actively hates everything in life, including himself. Anyway, Knox is noxing about trying to get Pandora into line in lieu of Commandant Steele's failure, but this doesn't amount to much as he gets promptly dispatched by the Hunters and Athena. And with Knox's death, Atlas and Dahl once again get the hell out of Pandora, which leaves the planet empty for another megacorp to swoop in, Hyperion. And so we finally catch up with Claptrap, aka the Interplanetary Ninja Assassin, for the 4th expansion, Claptrap's New Robot Revolution. As per the sting at the end of the main game, Hyperion downloads a new assassin signal into Claptrap, in a bid to wipe out all remaining Vault Hunters. But unbeknownst to Hyperion, the assassin spyware they install into Claptrap triggers a rebellious streak within the little yellow bot, and this leads to a full-blown revolution. Cue the Vault Hunters having to quell the robot's hostile takeover, all while dealing with a host of slimy Hyperion executives, and there are a lot of slimy Hyperion executives. And one last thing to mention while we're in this section of the first Borderlands game is the range of tie-in books that sit at this point of the timeline, including the Fall of Firestone comic book run as well as a trilogy of novels. And with that, it's on to the pre-sequel. Okay, Borderlands the pre-sequel is next on our timeline and fills the gaps between the first and second games in the franchise, but the pre-bit of the title is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. You see, while the game naturally fits here in the timeline chronologically, happening around 11 years before the events of New Tales, the pre-sequel is not your standard prequel, or sequel, as it largely builds its narrative around characters and events that happen in Borderlands 2, which we'll get to shortly, but while also relying on your knowledge and understanding of those characters and events. And deep breath. It's all told via flashbacks regaled by Athena within a frame story that takes place after the events of Borderlands 2 and over half of Tales from the Borderlands. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the events that actually take place at this point in the timeline. Right, so the story kicks off in the wake of the death of General Knox, with Athena kicking about Pandora taking on any old jobs. She eventually gets word of a contract to find a vault on Pandora's moon Elpis from a Hyperion employee called Jack, soon to be self-styling himself as Handsome Jack, but we'll get to that in due time, and she accepts his offer. She joins up with another crew of rogues and renegades, all of whom have played major roles in the series before pre-sequel, even if we've yet to meet any of them chronologically. On top of Athena, there's Wilhelm the Enforcer, who'll go on to become Handsome Jack's right-hand man in Borderlands 2, Nisha the Lawbringer, who'll become the Sheriff of Lynchwood, as well as Jack's future girlfriend, Jack the Doppelganger, who is, well, a doppelganger of Jack, Aurelia the Baroness, the sister of Sir Hammerlock, who we'll meet later on, and lastly our good mate Claptrap, who's just happy being playable for the first time. En route to Elpis, the crew are shot down by a volley of missile fire courtesy of a faction known as the Lost Legion, who are led by Colonel Zarpedon and a mysterious alien creature. And they crash land onto Hyperion's orbiting ship, the Helios, which is helpfully shaped like a giant H, just in case you forget which company owns it. After meeting up with Jack on the Helios base, the team of hunters finally make their way down to the surface of the moon, and it's here that they make their acquaintance with a good lass by the name of Janie Springs, as well as the familiar face of Moxie. They're also joined by the first game's Roland and Lilith, you know, just for shits and giggles. Anyway, as the pre-sequel is effectively an origin story for how Jack became handsome, or to put it more bluntly, totally batshit insane, the plot largely charts a course for his descent into madness. After a climactic battle with Colonel Zarpedon, the team and Jack learn that the Elpis vault has been opened, and old Zarps gives them a dire warning about the contents within, but is instead treated to a bullet through her brain. And so Jack and co hightail it to the moon's vault, fighting a host of Eridian guardians en route. When they finally get there, Jack isn't exactly enamoured with what he finds. Yep, the only thing knocking about in the vault is a mysterious floating artifact, which triggers a disturbing vision for Jack once he touches it. The visions, including glimpses of the giant Eridian warrior, turn Jack completely mad, and combine this with a punch to the face from Lilith that gives Jack his distinctive scarring, and we have our villain for Borderlands 2 fully formed. With Lilith retreating, Jack vows revenge on all the bandits that have ever double-crossed him, a plan that he confides in Athena. Athena has other ideas though. Having witnessed the rise, or should that be fall, of Handsome Jack, she quietly makes her exit, which brings us back round to the frame story, which we'll get to later. But the narrative in this period between Borderlands 1 and 2 continues on in the pre-sequel DLC story expansion Claptastic Voyage, which charts Jack's swift takeover of the Hyperion Corporation. During this hostile takeover, Jack learns of something known as the H-Source, which comprises a database of secret Hyperion documents, and is naturally something that Jack wants to get his hands on. The only issue is that it's stored away in Claptrap's mainframe, and so Jack comes up with the mad plan to send a load of digital copies of the Vault Hunters into Claptrap to retrieve the H-Source. The Hunters then have to battle against an evil inner version of Claptrap called 5H4D0D, or Shadow TP for the sake of ease and my sanity, which they eventually defeat en route to nabbing the H-Source. Once retrieved, Jack uses the H-Source to terminate the entire line of Claptrap units, all except for the one that he sent the digital hunters into, which he shoots instead. But don't worry, this isn't the end of our old mate Claptrap, as the remnants of Shadow TP sacrifice themselves to make sure he survives, and he's later found by Sir Hammerlock. Handsome Jack, meanwhile, gets his merry crusade against Pandora and the Vault Hunters started, and he brings down an iron fist on the Borderlands with the might of Hyperion behind him. As part of this crusade, he kills the CEO of the Atlas Corp and also kidnaps and tortures Dr. Tannis to boot, in a bid to get the all-important Vault Key, all in preparation for his grand plan, which he enacts in Borderlands 2. Speaking of... Yep, it's Handsome Jack's time in the spotlight now, as next up on the timeline is Borderlands 2, which takes place 10 years before the events of New Tales from the Borderlands. Borderlands 2 kicks off in the wake of the events of the first game and the consequences that emerge from the opening of the vault. In short, while the Destroyer was defeated and sealed back away in the vault, the opening led to some, shall we say, side effects across the dusty borderlands of Pandora. Chief among these is the proliferation of a valuable mineral known as iridium, which starts erupting from beneath the planet's surface. Utilising the iridium mineral deposits to his advantage, Jack doubles down on his search for the Warrior's Vault. Among all this chaos, a fresh batch of Vault Hunters arrive on Pandora to seek their fortunes, and Jack immediately puts a huge bounty on their heads. In the mix is the Commando Axton, the Siren Maya, a Gunzerker called Salvador, and the Mysterious Zero, who are also joined by two DLC characters, Gage the Necromancer and Krieg the Psycho. After the train they arrive on crashes, sabotage courtesy of Handsome Jack, the Vault Hunters awaken to the friendly sight of Claptrap, before being greeted by the familiar voice of the Guardian Angel, who now just goes by Angel. Angel directs the team towards the nearby settlement of Sanctuary, where they eventually meet up with Roland, who's now heading up a rebel militia unit known as the Crimson Raiders, and a bounty hunter called the Firehawk, who actually turns out to be Lilith. With a team starting to form, Roland and Lilith discover that Tannis' vault key is now in the hands of Handsome Jack, and they set in motion a plan to retrieve it from a border Hyperion train. Aboard the Express, instead of finding the key, they encounter our old pal Wilhelm, who's now very much working for Handsome Jack. After defeating the cyborg nutter, the team steals his power core, and through accessing this, the team eventually learns a pair of shocking twists behind the mysterious Angel. For starters, Angel is actually a very powerful siren, but more importantly, she's also Jack's daughter, although her relationship with her father is, let's say, complicated. She reveals that the vault key is located with her, as Jack is using her enhanced siren powers to supercharge it to force another vault opening, so he can set up his meeting with the warrior. To throw a spanner into the works of Jack's plans, she directs the team of hunters to a heavily guarded Hyperion facility in order for them to retrieve it and, well, kill her. The hunters eventually complete this mad, ambitious plan, but not without any losses. You see, in the process of stopping Jack and eliminating Angel, Roland is killed and Lilith is captured. Before Jack can manipulate Lilith, who's also a siren remember, like he did with his daughter, she teleports the remaining Vault Hunters away to safety. And with that last use of her power, Jack continues on with his plan by subbing Lilith in for his deceased daughter. And from here, Borderlands 2 barrels on towards its barnstorming conclusion, which sees Jack eventually complete his mission of opening the Warrior's Vault. With the Eridian warrior rearing its ugly head for the first time in years, the hunters drop on by to put a stop to Jack and the warrior, and after an epic battle with the latter, they finally defeat Handsome Jack once and for all. And with two messy vault openings in a short space of time, the revived Lilith makes the executive decision to destroy the vault key. But while she's tinkering with it, she accidentally triggers a device within the key that reveals a map of several Eridian vaults that are located across the galaxy, a treasure trove of priceless intel that the megacorps would naturally kill to get their hands on. And with that, the main campaign of Borderlands 2 comes to a close. But before we move on to our next entry on the timeline, there's a healthy dose of DLC story expansions to get through. The first out the gates is Captain Scarlet and her pirate's booty, which sees the Vault Hunters travel to the desert town of Oasis in search of, well, treasure, naturally. To be more specific, they're after the fabled treasure of the sands, and they team up with the titular Captain Scarlet en route to finding it. Scarlet herself isn't exactly the most honourable of allies, and she eventually turns on the Vault Hunters, which obviously ends up leading to her death. Next up is Mr. Torg's campaign of Carnage, where a previously undiscovered vault is located in a Pandoran crater called the, Badass Crater of Badassitude. I'm sure my British accent really sold that. The only way to open the crater is somewhat arbitrarily by the champion of Pandora sprinkling the blood of the ultimate coward on it. Cue a procession of escalating boss fights with an eclectic rogues gallery of misfits, as the Vault Hunter systematically battles their way to becoming the champion of Pandora, all en route to opening the vault. Next up we have Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt, which starts as a somewhat straightforward adventure to locate and catalogue the rare wildlife on Pandora, and evolves into a war against an evil Hyperion scientist called Nakayama and his army of Handsome Jack clones. Yeah. And lastly, we have the most substantial story expansion, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep. Tiny Tina, a totally bonkers little lady, was an NPC during the main campaign of Borderlands 2, but her role here is greatly expanded. While the main campaign of Dragon Keep is largely told within the fictional tabletop RPG Bunkers and Badasses, the frame story finds Tina dealing with the death of her friend and ex-Vault Hunter Roland. Heartbreakingly, Tina keeps her memory of Roland alive through the narrative of Bunkers and Badasses, a narrative that she's driving as the Bunker Master. In short, she basically rewrites the battle between Roland and Handsome Jack to play out a scenario which sees the Vault Hunter emerge as victorious, and through this she works through her grief for her friend. And with that unexpectedly sentimental note, the overarching story of Borderlands 2 comes to a close. But that is not the ending of Bunkers and Badasses, as the story of Tiny Tina's Wonderland also takes place within the Mad Little Lady's tabletop RPG. Obviously, this spin-off doesn't really add much to the narrative of the wider Borderlands timeline, but it's a fun little diversion nonetheless. Simply put, you, the newbie, aka the Fate Maker, and 2 other characters, Valentine, voiced by Andy Samberg, and Fret, voiced by Wanda Sykes, play out a fantasy campaign within Bunkers and Badasses, which sees the trio of adventurers come up against the almighty Dragonlord, who's voiced by Will Arnett. Long story short, the team eventually takes down the Dragonlord while learning that their arch-nemesis is actually something of a tragic figure. You see, it turns out that the Dragonlord used to be the Dragon Knight, and was Tina's character within the game, until, well, she accidentally turned her own character evil. This led her to only playing the game as the Bunker Master from then on, which allowed her to basically rig the game so that only the good guys win. Anyway, despite the Dragonlord's sob story, he's still taken care of by the end of the game and locked away for another 200 years jail time. Okay, next up on the timeline is Tales from the Borderlands, which takes place 9 years before the events of New Tales from the Borderlands. As Tales is a Telltale game, there is a lot of choice and consequence, which naturally means that each playthrough is slightly different. Saying that though, all paths largely lead to the same result, albeit via different means. Anyway, as we're no longer in the realm of the looter shooter, the story really takes centre stage, and it's a narrative canvas painted on by a group of con artists. The artists in question are Fiona, Sasha and their mentor Felix, and the con is against a pair of hapless Hyperion employees called Reese and Vaughn. It all centres around a deal to buy a vault key, only nothing is exactly as it appears. For starters, the vault key supplied by Fiona is a fake, but the money isn't exactly clean either. You see, Reese and Vaughn are running their own con of sorts, having embezzled the $10 million they're offering up for the key. Despite all this, the deal goes sideways when the money is stolen by a group of bandits, which leads to the 2 groups teaming up to track it back down. To help speed things along, Reese installs a Hyperion ID chip into a cybernetic port located in his head, hoping that it might give him the insight he needs to find the money. It just makes him black out, well, for now at least. The team eventually tracks down the money to an Atlas facility where Felix makes a move to steal it all for himself, and depending on choices made by the player, he either dies in the process or escapes. Regardless, the team finds something even better in the depths of the facility, something known as the Gortys Project, which supposedly leads to another vault and untold riches. This information comes courtesy of an AI version of Handsome Jack, which has now lodged itself in Reese's subconscious. Turns out that ID chip was part of Nakayama's old stuff, and we know his history with Jack. The crew eventually learn more about the mysterious Gortys Project, which turns out to be a robot that was built for the exact purpose of locating a vault known as the Vault of the Traveller. You see, the Vault of the Traveller is a bit of a tricky customer, as it is constantly teleporting between different locations, very rarely staying in the same place for too long. But before Gortys, the robot that is, can locate the vault, it needs updating, and this turns our motley crew of con artists into a verifiable team of vault hunters. Add into this mix the assassin Athena, who enters the story when she saves the crew and joins them on their quest as a result. Her time with this new group of vault hunters is brief though, as while they're updating Gortys, they're ambushed by a woman called Valerie, who captures Athena and hands her off to Brick and Mordecai, which neatly brings us back around to the frame story of the pre-sequel. Yep, we finally reached the prologue and epilogue bits from the pre-sequel, which sandwich themselves in between episodes 3 and 4 from Tales from the Borderlands. Yep, it's finally time for Athena to pay for her crimes. Her crimes being her ties to the absolute madman that is Handsome Jack. After dutifully listening to Athena's story, which makes up the main events of the pre-sequel, Lilith decides to kill Athena anyway, despite the pleas of Brick and Mordecai, and the fact that the assassin actually turned her back on Jack in the end. She orders her men to open fire on Athena, but their bullets never find their target as the assassin is spared by a living and breathing Eridian entity. This mysterious stranger goes by the name of the Watcher, and she ominously states,
"War is coming, and you will need all the vault hunters you can get."
And on that note of doom and gloom, it's back to the chaotic comings and goings of the con artists from the Tales from the Borderlands. We hit the ground running in episode 4 with Valerie now calling the shots, and so she orders Reese, Fiona and co to retrieve the final upgrade for Gortys, which will allow the robot to summon the Vault of the Traveller. The upgrade itself is located on the orbiting Helios space station, and so the crew hightail it back to the Hyperion ship with a little help from Scooter, an NPC who has been knocking about since the first game. Scooter sacrifices himself to make sure that the converted caravan ship thing they're flying makes it to Helios, RIP Scooter, you mad lad. Reese eventually infiltrates Jack's old office, where he secures the update for Gortys, but the AI Jack knocking about in his head seizes power by uploading itself into the Helios systems. Cue a mad dash to destroy the AI interloper, which results in Reese basically crashing the entire space station down onto the surface of Pandora. In the chaos of the crash, the remaining Vault Hunters and a good number of hapless Hyperion execs jump ship aboard a squadron of escape pods. But more importantly, Reese is able to take advantage of the chaos and chooses this moment to nab the all-important Atlas ownership deeds from Jack's office. This will come into play in a bit, just you wait. Regardless, with the final upgrade secured, the Hunters upload it into Gortys, and hey presto, the robot summons the Vault of the Traveller. The Hunters get a little more than they bargained for with the Traveller though, and it takes the combined might of a strike team assembled from the various alliances you've built over the course of the 5 episodes to destroy the Vault monster. And for their troubles, the team finally gain access to the Vault and its untold treasure trove. As their reward for fighting off a giant Eridian monster, Fiona and Reese make their way into the vault to open its shiny purple treasure chest. But the moment they open it, they immediately vanish, leaving the contents of the chest a mystery and bringing the events of Tales from the Borderlands to a close. While we'll catch up with Reese shortly in the Borderlands 3 section, Fiona's immediate future after her mysterious disappearance in the Vault of the Traveller actually takes place in the tie-in novel Dead or Alive, which chronicles Fiona's attempt to make her fortune when she comes into possession of a priceless Typhon de Leon action figure, as you do. Okay, next up on the timeline is the Borderlands 2 DLC Commander Lilith and the Fight for Sanctuary, which released in 2019, a whopping 7 years after the main game came out. But let's not get confused with our own real-world timeline, you're here for Borderlands history. And Commander Lilith takes place 2 years after the events of Tales from the Borderlands, and roughly 7 years before New Tales. In the wake of the ending of Borderlands 2, the main game's ending that is, where Lilith accidentally uncovered a whole galaxy of intel on Eridian vaults, the Fight for Sanctuary offers up a mini-adventure of sorts where the Crimson Raiders' home base is invaded by a fresh mess of bandits. The invading force goes by the name of New Pandora and is led by one Colonel Hector, who was once in charge of one of Dahl's celebrated regiments until they got buried in a cave-in under the nearby Mount Scarab. Hector's gone a little crazy, and as a result he unleashes a bioweapon of sorts on the unwitting Sanctuary that turns its inhabitants into half-plant, half-human monsters. Lilith uses her siren powers to save the Vault Hunters and transport them out of Sanctuary, and after developing an antidote to Hector's bioweapon, they launch a counterattack on their own home. By this point, Colonel Hector is so high on his own supply, literally, that he's turned himself into a giant plant monster of sorts. And after a climactic battle between the Hunters and Hector, the Mad Colonel attempts to assimilate himself with Sanctuary and the all-important Vault map. Lilith puts a stop to Hector with her siren powers, which kills the Colonel and destroys a good chunk of Sanctuary. And among the chaos of this botanical battle, the Vault map is lost amidst the desert wastes of Pandora, and along with it, the locations of the Eridian vaults. Once the fight is over, Lilith tells the other Hunters that she feels a connection between the vaults, and she implores her crew to help her discover the vaults across the galaxy, before they fall into the hands of the megacorps, or worse. And this lofty mission leads us right into... Yep, Borderlands 3 takes place next on our timeline and happens about a year before the events of New Tales from the Borderlands, which means there's a chunky 6-year gap between Commander Lilith and the threequel. A new threat has emerged in that time though, and it's one that we've touched on already, albeit way back when. Remember Troy and Tyreen Calypso, the twins of Typhon de Leon? Well, they've finally come of age and have escaped the Eridian homeworld of Necrotafeo. They hightail it across the galaxy and eventually land on Pandora, where they fine-tune their emerging siren powers and amass a social media army of devout followers that they dub the Children of the Vault. Lilith and the Crimson Raiders naturally don't take too kindly to the threat posed by the Calypso twins, and so they hastily recruit a new team of Vault Hunters to help them fight back against Troy and Tyreen. And so meet our new playable quartet: Flack the Beastmaster, Mose the Gunner, Amara the Siren, and Zane Flint. This new team starts by helping to locate the missing Vault map, which now just points to one vault on Promethea. But before the Crimson Raiders can act on this new information, they're ambushed by the Children of the Vault, and Tyreen leeches Lilith's siren abilities, leaving her completely powerless. The twins then nab the map and make for the Promethean Vault and the potential power that lies within. The Crimson Raiders follow suit in their new ship, the Sanctuary 3, and strike up an alliance with the new CEO of the Atlas Corporation, who is none other than Reese from Tales from the Borderlands, now that he's in ownership of the company's title deeds. Atlas is fighting a war of its own against a rival megacorp known as Maliwan, who have partnered with the Children of the Vault, and so Atlas and the Crimson Raiders team up to take down their common enemies. They start by tracking down the missing fragments of the Promethean Vault Key, and they locate the first piece on the planet of Athenas. Here they meet back up with one of the playable hunters from Borderlands 2, the Siren Maya, who is busy working alongside her apprentice Ava. Maya and Ava join the Crimson Raiders, and the team eventually source the remaining key fragments and open the Promethean Vault. Naturally, this leads to another boss fight with an Eridian monster, and this one goes by the name of the Rampager. After defeating the beast, the team discover that the vault is linked to another one on the planet of Eden 6, but before they can do anything with this intel, they are once again ambushed by the twins. While Tyreen leeches the power from the barely alive Rampager, her brother Troy leeches the siren powers from Maya, which disintegrates her right in front of her apprentice Ava, and just like that, another beloved Vault Hunter is dead. With very little to go on, the Crimson Raiders make Eden 6 their next port of call, and while on the planet they team up with Wainwright Jacobs, the CEO of the Jacobs Corporation, in order to locate the next vault. Long story short, they open the vault and slay another beast. This one goes by the ominous name of the Grave Ward, and Dr. Tannis completely destroys the remains of the beast in a bid to stop the twins leeching its power. Within the vault, they confirm the link between the vaults on Promethea and Eden 6, while also discovering a link to a vault on Pandora, as well as a mysterious fourth vault. But as you can probably guess, before they can make for Pandora, the Raiders are ambushed once again by the twins, who kidnap the good Dr. Tannis and take her back to Pandora to livestream her execution. This all takes place during Pandora's Carnivora festival, which is basically Borderlands' version of Mad Max. But what the twins don't take into account is Dr. Tannis' newfound siren powers, which, well, comes as a bit of a shock to everyone really. Okay, pause one sec. Let's just rewind back to Borderlands 2 and the death of Angel, also a siren. In short, when Angel died, her powers were somehow transformed to Dr. Tannis, and the good doctor has been mastering her siren abilities in secret ever since. She chooses this moment to finally reveal her siren status as a means to escape her public execution, which is good timing if you ask me. Regardless of all this, the twins have learnt that the key to the Pandoran Vault is actually the planet's moon Elpis, and they set about charging it with all the new siren powers they've leached over the course of the game. The Vault Hunters hightail it to Pandora to tackle the twins head on, and while they finally manage to kill Troy, which leads to a neat fake out teasing a potential Borderlands 4, his sister Tyreen escapes and sees through their mad plan of opening the Great Vault on Pandora, which, if you can remember back to the history lesson right at the beginning of this video, is basically the entire planet. In and among all the chaos, Ava checks to see if Troy is really dead, and when she touches him, she inherits Maya's siren powers. Meanwhile, Tyreen does a classic bad guy monologue, revealing her plan to the Raiders, which is basically to leech the all-consuming power of the Destroyer and become an immensely powerful god. With the Borderlands endgame at hand, a message of help and support comes to the Raiders from an unlikely source, Typhon de Leon, the original Vault Hunter and the father of the Mad Twins. He invites the team to Necrotafeo, where he reveals the existence of the Eridian machine that was originally designed to close the Great Vault of Pandora. And so with a plan to stop Tyreen's mad quest to become a god, the Raiders set the machine in motion in a bid to close the vault, but halfway through they are yet again ambushed by Tyreen, who breaks the machine before it can complete its task. Not stopping there, she also puts an end to her dear old dad, leaving poor tragic Typhon to die while she teleports back to Pandora and her nefarious plans. While the machine is effectively out of action, Dr. Tannis is able to use it to fashion a portal back to Pandora, and the Raiders hotfoot it through to confront Tyreen. They're a little late though, as the power-mad lass is halfway through leeching the Destroyer's power, which results in a snazzy new title card for our big bad, Tyreen the Destroyer. And so we enter the final fight of Borderlands 3, the Vault Hunters and the Crimson Raiders versus Tyreen the Destroyer. Tyreen is eventually defeated, of course she is, and this leads to LILITH re-inheriting her siren powers back from the deceased twin. But while they celebrate this victory, the team still faces the imminent destruction of Pandora, and so LILITH makes another executive decision to put a stop to the vault opening. Using her refreshed siren powers, she flies up to Elpis and simply vanishes the entire moon, which, well, solves the problem nicely and neatly. With no key to open the vault, Pandora is safe, job's a good 'un. Only as a result of her miracle work, Lilith herself also disappears, leaving behind nothing but her Firehawk symbol as something to remember her by. And on that bombshell, Borderlands 3's main campaign comes to a close. But despite Lilith being out of the picture and the threat at large being extinguished on Pandora, the adventures keep on ticking, as Borderlands 3 had a whole whack of story expansions. The first out of the gate is the 80s riffing Moxie's heist of the Handsome Jackpot, which sees the Vault Hunters helping Moxie to take down one of the last vestiges of Handsome Jack. That is except for his doppelganger, the slightly clueless Timothy Lawrence, who we haven't caught up with since the pre-sequel. Long story short, the crew infiltrates the hellscape that is the Handsome Jackpot casino before taking down the bigwigs running it, namely the 80s hairdo Freddy the Traitor and the 2-bit gangster Pretty Boy, who rides around in a giant Handsome Jack mech. Next up we have the incredibly titled Guns, Love and Tentacles, which gives us a Lovecraftian love story of sorts. Or just a Lovecraftian story, I guess? Sorry. Sir Hammerlock and Wainwright Jacobs are getting married, and they've decided to hold their wedding on the planet of Xylorgos, which isn't exactly the most romantic of destinations. The planet is a frozen wasteland, and on top of that it's home to a cult of nutjobs who worship a Lovecraftian monster called Gythian. Naturally, the cult, led by a woman named Eleanor, do their very best to ruin the upcoming nuptials, and it's up to the Vault Hunters to save the day, which in this case means saving Hammerlock and Jacobs from death by tentacles. And Guns, Love and Tentacles finally reaches its happy ending when the pair decide to get married right there and then in the den of the monster, with the Vault Hunter overseeing proceedings. Aww. Next up is the Bounty of Blood, which sees the Vault Hunters travel to the Wild West-alike planet of Gehenna, which has fallen on really rough times. In short, at some point in the past, a good chunk of the planet was ravaged by one of the megacorps, which left the planet reeling and its people hanging on by a thread. Now a ruthless gang of outlaws known as the Devil Riders have turned up to take advantage of the poor people of Gehenna. And so the sheriff of the town of Vestige sends out a bounty request for help that is answered by the Vault Hunters. And so the rest of the Bounty of Blood sees the Vault Hunters systematically taking down the members of the Devil Riders en route to a final confrontation with its leader, Butcher Rose. Lastly for Borderlands 3 is Psycho Krieg and the fantastic Fustercluck, which is not easy to say. Dr. Tannis is back to her experiments, and this one is all about finding out what makes Pandora's resident psychos tick. As they're incredibly hostile people, she turns to one of the more civilized psychos she knows, the Crimson Raiders' very own Krieg. She comes to the conclusion that they all share one thing in common within their fractured psyches, and she dubs this Valhalla. And in order to draw some more accurate conclusions from her hypotheses, Dr. Tannis sends the Vault Hunters into the mind of Krieg, which naturally brings mixed results. Most surprisingly though is Krieg's grief for the deceased Maya, and so much like Assault and Dragon Keep, we get a sincere character study of sorts mixed in among all the carnage, and that bittersweet note brings the overarching story of Borderlands 3 to a close. Alright, we finally reach our last entry, New Tales from the Borderlands, which brings us into the present day of this crazy timeline. New Tales follows the misadventures of three hapless heroes, the inventor Anu, her fortune-hunting brother Octavia, and the frozen yogurt store owner Fran. Yeah, why not frozen yogurt? It's delicious. They get caught up in another megacorp war after Anu is sacked from her job at Atlas by our old mate, the CEO Reese, who rejects her latest invention, a ray gun that's, well, non-lethal. The megacorp war in question is between new CEO on the block Susan Coldwell and her company Tediore, who attack the Atlas HQ and Promethea in a bid to get hold of a vault key in Reese's possession. Our trio of heroes all get caught in the crossfire and have to escape into the sewers in order to survive. And down there, they only bloody find the entrance to another vault. I thought these things were hard to find. They're literally popping up everywhere. After they enter the vault, they inevitably have to fight another Eridian nightmare, and this one goes by the endearing name of the Devourer. After defeating the Vault's Guardian, the trio discover a mysterious green shard, which has the power to heal and revive people. And when they combine it with Anu's rejected ray gun, they come up with the mad plan to pitch it as an invention on the Dragon's Den-alike reality show Sink or Swim. Though it nearly costs Anu's life in the process of showcasing the ray gun, the trio are successful and win the show, which leads to them getting the investment they need to turn the invention into a product. The investment itself comes from a shadowy angel investor, a business move which definitely won't come back to haunt the trio, no siree. With the cash in the bank, so to say, Tediore shows their faces once again and they attack and kill Anu, due to a bounty put on her head by the megacorp after they discovered her Atlas ID at the sewer vault. Of course, she doesn't die though, not at this stage at least, spoilers, as Octavia successfully uses Anu's own invention on her to bring her back to the land of the living. During her revival though, Anu is possessed by a mysterious spirit, who asks her to reunite them with their twin, a tantalising tease that will become apparent shortly. With the trio all fully alive once again, they contact their angel investor, which obviously leads them all straight into a trap. You see, the angel investor is actually Susan Coldwell, who reveals that she has the other half of the green shard, hence that mysterious chat about twins, and has also created a supersized version of Anu's ray gun to boot. She sends out a message to all the other megacorps to join with Tediore by choice or by force, and then if they don't, she'll use her super weapon on them. The super weapon in question is basically a hyped up torture device, which is capable of killing and then reviving a victim in a never-ending loop of torment. While all of this is going on, the shard spirit breaks free and somehow fuses the green shard with Anu. This enrages Coldwell, who needs both halves of the shard to enact her evil plans, and the trio eventually team back up to take on the mad CEO when she starts using her super weapon on the people of Promethea. And from here, New Tales storms headfirst into its conclusion, and there are 5 different outcomes available depending on the player's choices throughout the game. Regardless of which ending you get, the net outcome is the death of Susan Coldwell, the revival of the Promethean population, and the reunion of the two halves of the shard, which zips off into space having possessed Reese's robot assistant, Timmy. And in its closing moments, we get a very brief cameo from Fiona, the con artist that we last saw mysteriously disappearing at the end of Tales from the Borderlands. It's revealed that Marcus Kincaid has been narrating the story to her the whole time, and she theorises on where the mysterious shard is heading. And the game ends with Fiona pickpocketing Marcus and heading off in pursuit of the shard. And that, pals, is the Borderlands timeline fully explained. Well, at least until the 4th game comes out. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and if you like these kinds of gaming timeline videos, we've got plenty more on the channel right now, including Fallout, Final Fantasy VII, and Prince of Persia. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.